I don't know how it was in my hand. I have no idea if I touched it. I don't know. Well, wait a minute. That wasn't quite on. Okay.
Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Russell Steger. Viewer discretion is advised. 6:08 a.m. on February 1st, 1988. Durham, North Carolina 911 receives this call from a 14-year-old boy.
He had a walk doing it, went off. Where is he shot? I'm not sure. Just do it, please.
In that call, you can hear this young man named Jason telling the operator that his father had been shot. He doesn't really know where he's been shot, but he just knows he's been shot, and please hurry. When the ambulance arrives, they enter the bedroom of Russell and Barbara Steger. Barbara Steger seemed almost calm, maybe crying a little bit. And she directed them and pointed them to her husband, Russell, who was lying on his stomach on the bed. There was this large 12 to 18 inch blood stain on the pillow that was underneath his head. As the ambulance is trying to carefully work on Russell, they are moving him, and when they do so, they find this .25 caliber Beretta pistol kind of positioned under the pillow. And then near the pillow, they also find a spent shell casing. They notice that the hammer on the pistol had been cocked, and Barbara had stated to them that she had moved the pistol. And they were able to determine that Russell had a gunshot wound to the back of his head. Russell Steger was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately he would be pronounced deceased, dying from that single gunshot wound to his head. Russell Steger was born on May 22nd, 1947, and he lived his entire life in Durham, North Carolina. Russell grew up in a really loving home. He was always a well-behaved kid. He got great grades in school, he excelled in sports, and eventually in his adult years, he would become a baseball coach for a high school there in Durham. And his students, his athletes, would say that he was the best coach that they could possibly have. Russell was very understanding. He knew each, player's different abilities, what they could and couldn't do. He never put any kind of exceeded pressure on any of these athletes. He used his solid sense of humor to make it fun. He had a really just calm demeanor, did not ever have any kind of temper. He practiced good Christian values, and Russell earns the respect of not just faculty at the school, but from all of his students. Russell was someone who was very proud of what he has done with his life. And he was a good man. He knew that a lot of his students their families didn't have a lot of money. And so he would help buy the sporting equipment that they would need. He would actually buy groceries for some of these families. He would bring the kids' uniforms back to his home and wash them because they knew that some of these kids had to, do their laundry at laundromats, and sometimes that could be expensive. He was always organizing fundraisers and raffles and anything he can do to raise money for, his team, but also just for the kids in general. Russell had been married once before Barbara. He was married to a woman named Jo Lynn. They had a great marriage, but eventually they just kind of drifted apart, and so the marriage ended, but it was done pretty amicably. When the divorce happened, he was debating selling the house. And when he was putting the house up for sale, he met a woman named Barbara Ford. And eventually, the two of them, after this kind of chance meeting, because she was looking to purchase a home, because her husband had died somewhat recently. Unfortunately, her husband died in what was then described as an accidental shooting. He had been shot in his chest while cleaning his gun. And so Barbara and Russell, they kind of met, they started to date, they fell in love, and they got married. Barbara had 2 kids from her previous marriage, and Russell did not have any of his own children. It's something he wanted to have. It just never happened. And he very quickly kind of took on this fatherly role with her 2 kids. One of her kids was older and living out of the house, but by the time this case occurs, Barbara's 14-year-old son is living there with Barbara and Russell. From the outside looking in, Barbara and Russell's marriage was fantastic. Everyone thought they were this happy, loving couple. There was never any kind of known turmoil in the house. And then suddenly, all of their lives are thrust into tragedy when Russell is shot dead in his bedroom. The only other people in the house that night was Barbara and her son. So what happened? Well, Barbara states that Russell had become a little extra paranoid because there had been some recent robberies in this neighborhood. And so she claimed, would take his gun, a loaded gun, and put it underneath his pillow, in case someone breaks into the house, he has quick and easy access to it. Which, from that point, a lot of people in Russell's life said that's completely unlike Russell because he was trained in how to use firearms, and they said he would never put a loaded gun under his pillow. But that's what Barbara says he did, and so it's kind of like, okay. Well, because of what Barbara claims, it was his paranoia about robberies. Well, on the morning or the night in question here, she claims that she heard the alarm of her 14-year-old son go off, and she was concerned that Russell was going to kind of be startled awake by it and think someone was in the house. And so to prevent him from reaching underneath the pillow and getting the gun and accidentally shooting, her son, she says she reaches for the gun, and as she's pulling it out, she says it's a hair trigger type pull, and that she did barely even touch the trigger, but the gun went off, shooting Russell directly in the back of his head. And initially, his death was ruled an accidental shooting. They believed her story. But once they heard that Russell was a trained National Guardsman, he would work for the National Guard on the weekends, and they learned about how safe he was with his guns and how he would never keep them underneath his pillow. There were people just beginning to be like, I don't know if Barbara's telling the full story here. And his first wife said, yeah, that's not like him. He wouldn't put a gun underneath his pillow like that because that's dangerous, right? And so she would tell investigators, like, you got to look at Barbara and really verify her story here. That's when investigators found out that Barbara, who was previously known as Barbara Ford, she had a husband, a man named Larry Ford, who just so happened to die accidentally by being shot in his chest while she claims he was cleaning his gun. The evidence at the scene could not refute Barbara's story, and so his death was also ruled an accidental shooting. There was, at one point, his death years later was then changed from accidental to homicide, but they didn't know who did it or why. And so his case kind of just went on the back burner and just sort of sat there and went cold forever. And so at that point, detectives wanted to get a visual of what Barbara says happened. And so this is a clip of Barbara basically working with a detective who is, playing the role of Russell in bed, and her showing how it went down.
And I don't know how it was in my hand. I have no idea if I touched it. I don't know. Well, wait a minute, that wasn't quite on. Okay. And then I start getting up. Okay, that's how it was. I start getting up with it in my hand, but I don't know how I had it in my hand. Okay.
So there's a point where she says something like, well, wait a minute, no, that couldn't have been. Like, she had to change her story as she was trying to reenact it. She was realizing that the way she described it happening probably couldn't have happened the way she said. And so she had to think on the fly in that moment and change a little bit of her story. They also analyzed the gun because she said she barely even touched the trigger. And so they would have forensics look at the gun, and they determined by using weights the pressure it would take to fire this particular gun. And it took 4 pounds of pressure. This was far from a hair trigger thing. You had to deliberately and intentionally pull the trigger on that gun for it to go off. She also stated that she was lying down and she reached under the pillow, and as she's pulling the gun out, shot him kind of almost in a straight line behind his head. However, based on the positioning of his body, based on where the bullet entered his body, the gun could not have physically been fired from the angle she said it happened. As a matter of fact, when they recreated this, the only way the bullet could have entered the back of his head, based on the size of the bullet hole, had to have been from a few feet away from an angle, a downward angle. So she had to have been standing up almost, or maybe leaning on the bed and pulling the trigger at an angle to go into his head. There was no gunshot residue or powders on the comforter. If it happened the way she said it happened, there should have been traces of gunshot residue on the comforter, but there wasn't. So now everything about her story is falling apart. Her own son will refute what she said, because he says he woke up from his alarm, he went into the restroom and he turned on the shower. He was in the shower for a minute or two when he heard a loud pop. And he thought that was just someone who had slammed the toilet lid shut, and he just didn't see it. And so he gets out of the shower, and his mom says, "Oh my God, call 911, he's been shot, he's been shot."
He had a what gun and it went off. Where is he shot? I'm not sure. Just do it, please.
So her story about her reaching for the gun because the alarm went off did not happen that way. They also uncovered evidence that Barbara had recently forged a check from Russell's bank account that would be paid to her own bank account, and it basically depleted his entire account. Russell found out, and he had confided into some friends and family. Barbara's been stealing money from me. I think she's been cheating on me. I'm pretty sure she's being completely unfaithful. And Barbara, meanwhile, is pushing really hard now after his death to really make sure that his insurance policies are enacted and she gets the money, of course. And how adamant she was and how quickly she harped on this raised a lot of red flags. And then they found a tiny little cassette tape. When they played that cassette tape, they heard a voice from beyond the grave. Russell Steger himself recorded this audio recording days before his death.
This is Russ Steger. This is January 29th, 1988, 10 minutes of 2. The last few nights, Barbara has woken me up and gave me what she said was 2 aspirin. She stood there to see if I took it. I did not take it. The first one, I don't know what happened, but according to his parents, there was some foul play going on. He supposedly accidentally shot himself in their bedroom. My question is, did her husband, Larry Ford, accidentally shoot himself? Sometimes I wonder.
It was authenticated to be Russell's voice, confirmed by many people. He also identified himself as Russell on the tape. In that tape, and it's much longer than what I played here, but in that tape, he is essentially stating he is concerned that his wife Barbara may be trying to kill him. He thinks that she may have tried to poison him with some kind of medication that he did not take. He also expressed a lot of concerns and doubts about how her first husband died. He's basically saying, well, he died accidentally in a really bizarre way. Did she do it and lie to police? And so it was clear on that tape that Russell was concerned about his life. Now, by Barbara's own admission, that gun was in her hand. She says she shot him. So there's no refuting that. It's really about, is what she's saying the way it happened, is that true or is it not? Well, all of the evidence points to she was bold-faced fucking lying. And so Barbara Steger was arrested and charged with the murder of Russell Steger. At trial, Barbara Steger tried to play the depressed and falsely accused wife. She was crying and she was showing all this emotion. You're wrong. I didn't do this on purpose. This wasn't planned. But then the coroner came out with his report about where the bullet entered his head. They determined the angle, the only angle it could have possibly come from. She had to have been standing several feet away from him, holding the gun at a distance and deliberately pointing it at him. And she had to pull that trigger with intent. It was not a hair trigger. They showed this in court. They proved it. They proved about the angle the gunshot entered his head. They proved that there was no gunshot residue on him or on the comforter where there should have been. The shell casing they found should have been found in the middle of the bed if her story was true. It was not. That shell casing was found right next to the pillow and next to his head. Barbara thought that that's probably what should have happened. They had the fact that she had forged his signature on checks, basically depleting all the money from his account. They showed that she was adamant about getting all the life insurance policies he had within days of his death. And then they played that audio again of Russell saying he was afraid for his life. He thinks Barbara might be trying to kill him, and he thinks that she killed her previous husband. Which, by the way, her previous husband's family also agrees she probably killed him. The evidence against Barbara Steger was absolutely out of this world overwhelming. Everything she said was a lie. The physical evidence told the truth. Her own son would testify that what her story was not true, about how he was in the shower and the gunshot didn't go off until minutes after he was in the shower. She didn't stand a chance. I mean, there was no way she was winning this. And the jury agreed. They would end up finding her guilty of capital murder. And then Barbara Steger was actually sentenced to death. However, there would be a point where the death sentence was overturned, and she was then resentenced to life in prison. And based on North Carolina law, if this particular life sentence means that she would have to become eligible for parole at some point. However, Barbara Steger to this day is actually still in prison. She doesn't ever have to be released. Just because she has the option for parole doesn't mean she will be paroled. And so hopefully she is there for a very long time. Because of all of this, they would begin to kind of maybe look a little bit further into Larry Ford's death, her first husband. And it does sound like they truly believe that at this point, she killed him because she also financially benefited from Larry Ford's death. She was also being unfaithful to him. The evidence against her in terms of his shooting was overwhelming. But because they had treated it as an accidental shooting, and because they did not collect the evidence from Larry Ford's death properly, because, you know, unlike with Russell's case, they started to take things out of the bedroom when they ruled it accidental, but within, a short amount of time, they said, no, this doesn't sound right. And so evidence was kind of recollected and they had enough time to do that. But with Larry Ford's death, that evidence was gone and it was ruled accidental. The evidence wasn't looked at or touched at for years. And some of it was just completely gone at that point. And so they don't believe Barbara's story about how he died. They do think that she shot and killed him. However, because she is serving a life sentence with the possibility of parole, they decided to not prosecute her for Larry Ford's death. And that could have, if they had the evidence, if they had the solid physical evidence to believe they can convict her for his murder, they probably would have gone forward with it just to make sure she's never released from prison ever again. But they, can't waste the money and the resources prosecuting a case that they can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And again, that's because they did not treat Larry Ford's death from the get-go as a potential homicide. It was just, accidental, get rid of everything, bada bing, bada boom, we're done, boom. And this is why I think at every case like this, no matter what, always collect the evidence just in case. Make sure you are treating it as a potential homicide right from the get-go and continue investigating from a homicide until you've determined it is an accident. Not the other way around. Don't determine, because she said it was an accident, it must have been an accident, we gotta believe her, and then flip years later and say, maybe it was a homicide. That's poor police work. You should always treat these types of things with immediate suspicion. Treat it as a murder, even if it isn't. Treat it that way. Better safe than sorry. Because if they treated it that way, they might have come to the conclusion that Barbara shot and killed Larry Ford, and if they did that, then she never would have met Russell. And then Russell would still be alive to this very day. But he isn't. And that's just another tragedy added to this, is that his death ultimately could have been prevented. But, at least in the end, Russell Steger did get the justice he rightfully deserved. But That is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney, a Dooney, a Dingleberry Dongs. Hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you are new here, hello, my name is Mike. I tell true crime stories here on YouTube, obviously. So please subscribe if you are into that kind of thing. I tell long form, and now I tell short form, like 3 minutes or less videos, so I do a combination of both. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. TikTok is still around, woohoo, and CapCut's finally back, so I can actually edit this video on CapCut. Wop, wop, wop. What? I don't know what that little celebratory noise was. Wop, wop, wop. Anyway, yeah, so everything's back to normal now. But anyway, if you want to follow me on TikTok, the links to that is in the link tree, which is in the description of this video below. Also in that link tree, you're going to find my case list. The case list is now over 6,800 names long. It is in alphabetical order for the most part, so scroll through it. You can see it if you want to. It's viewable by you guys. If you don't see a name on there that you want me to cover, just send me a really quick email. My email is also listed below. Just send me the name of the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add that name to my list. I scroll my list with my eyes closed and I choose the case I cover each video at random. So I cannot promise you when I'll cover that case, but I will get to it eventually. I promise. But that is it for this video, True Crime Roonies. So until the next case, ta-ta for now. Yeah. That was creepy, sorry. Stop it. Okay. Anyway. No, you hang up. No, seriously, hang up. Fine.